How we all doing? Hey, can we give it up for worship one more time? Man, that was stellar. Haley, we're so thankful for you. Your organization, your leadership, you're just killing it. Thanks so much. For those of you who were wondering who is the unknown man in the drum cage, my brother's in town and was willing to play drums for us this weekend. So that was super cool to see him up in there. Thanks, Ben. Let me ask you a question. We're moving into week 5 of our God and the Ancients series. Let me ask you a question. How many of you would consider yourself a confident person? Come on. I didn't say humble. Give me who's confident? Come on. Marty, you're confident. Yeah, I agree. All right. No one else? Really? Wow. Well, my message is shot. Potentially, you're a confident person because the presentation at work is no problem at all, right? That doesn't make you nervous. It doesn't make you anxious. Potentially, you know that you're a confident person because you can go to the bar for that blind date and not have any nerves, not have any stresses, not have any worries in any way. Maybe you know you're confident because life has been really, really hard for you in the past. And nothing that's currently happening could be worse than what's happened before. So you just have no fear about what's to come. You've braved the storm. Maybe you're confident because you've worked really hard to create something with your own hands. You've spent years and years creating a business, creating a legacy, creating a life story that is huge. And you're proud of that, and you're confident. And you realize that you have nothing to lose because of the big narrative that you've created. Or, seemingly 90% of the people in this room are just like me, and you have no confidence at all. Maybe because of your past, maybe because of how you were raised, maybe because of things people have said to you, you have very little confidence, and you have to fight it every time. Or maybe, and this is a big maybe you're secretly hiding a big, dark fill in the hole in your story. Maybe there's some secret in your life that you are trying so hard to keep hiding that it's actually coming out as confidence, but you have this deep insecurity, something in your life that you can't break through. And so you're overcompensating with something called confidence. You see, I think that's the place we find our character in this week 5 of our God and the Ancient Story, a series that we've been in so far where we look at real people in the Old Testament, sometimes New Testament, but real people in God's story. And we look at a real God and we look at how their stories crossed. But today, I think the very real aspect of the story we're looking at is this overcompensation of confidence. As we look into the story of Naaman, a man who on the outside needed absolutely nothing at all. Needed nothing. He had everything. But on the inside, if you remember in the series, we're trying to stick with a 2-part outline. We're answering 2 questions in this series. First, what do we learn about What do we learn about our character? What do we learn about our ancient? Today, the question will be, what do we know or what are we learning about Naaman? The second question we're going to answer is, what does their story teach us about God? It'd be really easy in this series, God and the Ancients, to just focus on the narrative of the Ancients and to forget how God is interacting with them. So we want to be intentional with that. So sticking with that, I just want to dive right into our first question. What do we know about this person of Naaman? Turn to 2 Kings with me, if you could. 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1, first part of verse 1. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and high in favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor. So very quickly we learn that Naaman wasn't just Naaman. We learn that Naaman was actually Commander Naaman. He was second in command. He was a general with power, a Syrian war hero, somebody with all power, influence, admired by all. It says that he was admired by his master, which means he was admired by arguably the most powerful person in the world at the time, the king of Syria. Now that's pretty cool, to be admired by somebody with such weight, influence, and power. In verse 1, we're not just reading of his military might and ferocity. It says, by his hand Syria has seen victory. We're not just reading about the physical valor, the physical victory, but also the honor attached to his name. It continues on and says, he was a great man with his master and held in high favor. All that to say, this dude was honored. He was admired. He was looked up to. He had national prestige. He had advantage. He had prosperity because he was so strategic in his command. He was so fierce in battle, and he was so patriotic in how he led his men. Talk about confidence, right? I don't know about you, but there's certainly not a Bible verse about me like that. By his hand, the Lord had given victory to this great nation. By his hard work, by his muscle, by his sweat, by his hand, the sword that was in his hand, Syria turned into the huge, giant military superpower that it became. It's almost like the Shamgar story, right? It's just this real quick passage thrown in that says, oh yeah, by the way, Shamgar killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad, right? You see, from the outsider perspective, he had the armor, he had the uniform, he had the chariot, he had the fame, the honor, prestige, and it seemed like he needed absolutely nothing. But I'm going to drop a truth bomb on you right now. Everyone has a big butt. You're supposed to laugh. The amen was good there. Thanks, Eric. Everyone has a big butt, so let's read on and read about Naaman's big butt. That's weird to say. 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1 again. Naaman, commander of the army, the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, would that my lord, she's speaking of Naaman there, would that my lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of leprosy. So Naaman went in and told his lord, the king of Syria, thus, and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent you Naaman, my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy. This is kind of funny. And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, am I God to kill and to make alive? And that this man sends word to me to cure a man of leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me. In other words, he got naked and started yelling at everybody. It's pretty interesting. Verse 8, but when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, why have you torn your clothes? Get dressed, let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. Verse 9, so Naaman came with his horses and chariots, stood at the door of Elisha's house. So now we learn, in my perspective, something new about this guy, Naaman. First, we find out that he's powerful. Secondly, now we see that he has two personas. In other words, he has a split personality. Picture with me the mental tension wrapped up in Naaman's story right now. He's the most decorated man of military in the course of history at this time. The second most powerful man in the world who has absolutely everything. I mean, he walks around with a swag that I cannot comprehend, right? He walks around with his head high, his armor gleaming, that helmet, that sword. I mean, all those things looking the part. All a while, the secret of leprosy is eating him alive. Think about the mental tension there, where you're constantly thinking about, this is who I'm supposed to be, this is who the people think I am, but this is really who I am. Everyone only sees my armor, but if they actually saw what was going on in my body, no one would care about me. Everyone would run away from me. I would be an outcast. Are you beginning to see that potential overcompensation of pride, of confidence in his life? You see, his condition of leprosy, in my opinion, certainly weighed heavier than his armor, especially to his mental state. It ate away and ate away and ate away at who he was. You know probably as well as I do that in those times, leprosy was a death sentence, right? I mean, modern medicine in the Western world has made leprosy pretty much a non-issue, but back then it was contagious as all get out, and there was no cure. There was no medicine. There was no treatment plan. There were no friends. You were going to die, and you were going to die alone, with no honor, with no prestige, but looked down upon. Just practically right now in this moment, place yourselves in General Naaman's shoes. The second most powerful man in the world, thinking to himself, how in the world, what lengths do I go to make sure no one finds out about my real condition? Imagine the blood, sweat, and tears. The mental inability for him to just remain stable because of what he was battling in his own mind. The extent he must have went to in order to ensure that people only saw General Naaman. And then this somehow, I love how nonchalant verse 2 and 3 are thrown in there. He's hiding, he's covering up, making sure no one sees his secret. And then all of a sudden, verse 2, now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel. In other words, they stole this girl and she became a slave to them. Let's just slip that in there. They carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. So she was going to see who Naaman really was because she was in their house. Verse 3, she said to her mistress, would that my Lord, would that Naaman were with the prophet Elisha, who's in Samaria. Elisha would cure this man of his leprosy. To me, I don't know about you. And then we continue in verse 4 and 5 that Naaman actually agrees with what this little slave girl says, and then he takes it to the most powerful man in the world, the king of Syria. So to me, it's rather profound that this overconfident, this prideful general of generals, this leader of thousands, this man who has slain more people than we've seen in our entire life, all of a sudden takes the word of a little girl that they captured from Israel. And not only that, but he buys into what she has to say and he takes it to his Lord, somebody that could have him killed, somebody that could have him outcast, somebody that could have him removed from power in a second. Do you see the desperation in Naaman's life? The desperation to get this thing handled, to get this thing taken care of. This was a cool quote on this topic. It says, a little captive maid, strong in her young, simple faith in the God of Israel, was the means of directing the proud but afflicted Naaman to the divine source of healing. You see, lost in his two-personaed life, this suggestion from a seemingly insignificant character offers Naaman the possibility of solving the problem of pain, stress, split personality, and seclusion in his life. So Naaman hears this from this little girl. Hey, I know someone that could heal you. He takes it to the king of Syria, and then what happens? Well, I like to think that Naaman has a pretty cool chariot, like it's camo, maybe it's a Hummer chariot or something like that. It's not just your everyday, chariot that we see driving down the Palmer Wasilla. He jumps in this camo Hummer chariot, and he takes his military entourage to the quiet, the small, quaint house of Elisha the prophet. And I can just picture it. This man who's powerful, filled with pride, filled with confidence, gets in his chariot, and he and thousands of men, along with his prized stallions, go busting out of Dodge, and they go to this quaint little farmer's house, this quaint little prophet's house, who's probably sitting there, I don't know, watching football or journaling or something, and then all of a sudden he just hears a military entourage coming to his house. And I like to believe that Elisha knew what was going on because he was a prophet and had that special relationship with the Lord. But all of a sudden, General Naaman steps down out of his chariot. The dust dies down from his stallions. He steps down. He descends to Elisha's house, and he knocks on the door. And you can imagine the trumpets, the announcements of General Naaman is on your property. General Naaman is at the door. And what we're about to read is pretty profound to me, and we're going to learn something new about Naaman in this section. 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 9 through 12, the next part of the story. So Naaman with his horses and chariots stood at the door of Elisha's house. This is almost comical if we read it the way it's supposed to. And Elisha sent a messenger to him. So Naaman knocks on the door of Elisha's house. Elisha doesn't come to the door. Elisha sends a messenger to the door saying, go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. Poof, and the door slams, and that's it. Verse 11, but Naaman was angry, and he went away saying, behold, I thought he would surely come out. I thought Elisha would surely come out and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand all over the place and cure the leper. I don't know what that would look like. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned away and went in his rage. In other words, think about the tension here. Put yourselves in his shoes. This man who just revealed, vulnerably, just revealed the real him to someone else. Right? It's not that Elisha already knew. It's not that the servant already knew. This man revealed himself again. He had to become vulnerable and humble enough to say, I'm taking off my helmet to show you who I really am. And then this is the answer he gets. He says, does this servant, does this prophet even know who I am? Does he know the power that I have in my hands? He has the door to not only not come to the door himself, to send a servant to the door, but then he has the nerve to tell me to do something that I've tried over and over and over again, to just go take a bath. He tells me to go get in a dirty river, not even a clean river, and go take a bath. I can only imagine the frustration, the pride, and the anger in his life. And contextually speaking, the rivers in his hometown, the two that he spoke of, were much faster moving. They were much cleaner than the slow, muddy, gross Jordan River. I'll let you in on a little secret. It's really ironic, and it makes me mad that it happened. So we filled up this awesome baptistry this week, right? You guys like it? It's kind of cool. It's about 95 degrees right now, by the way. Hot tub, come on. We filled this up. What day was it, David? Wednesday? We filled it up, looked great. We have a ton of iron in our water here. So we fill it up, we start testing the heater. I come in Thursday morning ready to start prepping my message, and that water looks grosser than anything I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, it turned yellow, brown, nasty. Just don't look in it right now. I don't know what color Noah will come out, after. No, we had it cleaned up. But it was so ironic to me to think about that as I'm prepping for this message, that Naaman wanted the clean, pure water of his home country, not the nasty, gross, iron-filled baptismal water that we're going to be dunking people in later today. Not really, but. That said, asking him to wash in the Jordan, asking him to take off his armor in a gross, messy river was like asking Chanel to whisper. It's just not going to happen. It's like asking my son to sleep through the night, right? It's just not going to happen. And not only was this an embarrassing blow to his pride, but I think it is a request that gave him more fear than he's ever embraced or had to face in his entire life. This is a man who we've said over and over again, and I don't want to be a broken record, but was filled with pride, was filled with honor, filled with prestige, was a military war hero. I mean, paved the way, literally mowing people down for Syria to have victories. But all of a sudden, Elisha, the servant of Elisha, asked him to do something that was more vulnerable than anything he's ever done. In order to go wash in the Jordan, he had to remove that armor. In order to go wash in the Jordan, he had to take off those initial layers of clothes. And for the first time, the thousands of men that he led would see the real, true Naaman. They would see him in a place of need, not in a place of leadership and command and charge. Naaman, for the first time ever, would be forced to reveal his real condition to his men, to remove the facade of the honor-filled armor and reveal the fact that he, just like all of us, he needed help. Imagine once again with me, the humbling experience as these thousands of men, these sweet, awesome Hummer camo chariots, they make the way from Elisha's house and they go to the River Jordan. And all of a sudden, Naaman, I'm sure, is in a state of mental chaos saying, what do I do in this situation? Do I believe it? Do I not believe it? Am I willing to step down into this river? Can I get away with stepping down and dipping myself 7 times while leaving all my armor on? I'm sure he is facing all these things that we would have been facing in that situation. But in a moment like no other, once again, he descends, but not in a place of pride, in a place of humility, in a place of fear. As he steps down off of his chariot and removes his helmet, and removes his breastplate and removes his boots and puts his weapons on the ground, and the men start seeing and knowing the pain, the suffering, the need in their leader's life. You know, isn't it funny how the more insecure we are, the more we overcompensate with pride and false confidence, stubbornness, right? The more we fight for ourselves to be right because we're so fearful of the other result. Naaman's secret was getting more and more revealed, and in a way of defensive overcompensation, he freaked out and leaned hard into his stature, into his frame, into his armor, and he got mad at the servant and said, "How dare you ask me to do something like that?" And I just want to quickly ask you this morning, what are you pridefully defending in your life? What are you stubbornly defending in your life? What are you deeply afraid to reveal to those who are closest to you? God is challenging you to reveal the secret in your life. Thankfully, one of Naaman's closest servants convinces him to swallow his pride and give it a shot. He said, didn't the man of God say, go dip 7 times and you'll be clean? I mean, what if it actually happens? Why don't you just go try it? So he convinces Naaman to do it, and let's see what happens. 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 14. So he went down, and he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Verse 15, then he returned to the man of God and all his company, and he came and stood before him, and he said, behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel, so accept now a present from your servant. 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 14 to 15, and all of a sudden, we learn something new from Naaman, don't we? We learn that he's all of a sudden filled with praise. That he goes from a place of power to a place of insecure pride, then to a place being filled with praise. Profoundly, Naaman humbles himself enough to not only listen to the little slave girl, but now actually listen to the prophet's servant. He's now humbled himself to listen to 2 people that he would never actually listen to in his day-to-day life. And guess what? It actually worked. He was healed. He was made clean. And we don't really know how it happens, if nothing happened until time 7 and then all of a sudden he just came up clean. Or I like to picture that he got cleaner each time and he just kept going down and scrubbing more and more. And it was the picture of God's grace just washing over and washing over and washing over. And with each wash, his pride washed away. His overcompensation of confidence washed away. And he was filled with more grace and love and patience and understanding. What we do know, however, is that Naaman's pride turned into submissiveness, and his flesh was restored and turned into health like that of a little child. I mean, I look at Joshua's skin all the time, right? He's just 8 months old, and it is the softest, purest thing out there. And all parents know how soft that baby skin is, right? You see, no longer does he think about, no longer does he care about what his men think. That problem's gone, isn't it? No longer is he stuck in physical pain. No longer does he have the mental stress of hiding the secret. No longer does he have the shame of living with something that would make him an outcast. Now, because God is for him, it's pure shock. It's pure joy. It's pure peace. It's thankfulness. He's never experienced a peace in his mind like he is in this moment because he no longer has to worry about 2 personas. He's now one person. On this, a commentary I read a lot, it said this. It's kind of a wordy quote, but it was rich to me. Who can describe the wonder and gladness of Naaman as he witnessed and felt this new renovation on his body? He sprints to the man of God to express his gratitude, acknowledge the supremacy of Jehovah, share his determination to worship him, offer gifts, and to seek further instructions on getting to know the true God. His life has been radically changed because of God's proving to be for him. Naaman's life has been transformed. He's been shown that the God of Israel is for him, and now all of a sudden, as he tells the prophet Elisha, he wants to reorient, he wants to redirect his life to prove that he is for his newfound God. He wants to go from being this prideful man, this prideful war leader, to being somebody who offers sacrifices and worships the one true God of Israel, even when the people in his kingdom are worshiping another God. He says to the prophet, know that while they're worshiping this God, I'm going to be bold and I'm going to worship your God because he's the true God. There's something powerful in that. So Naaman was filled with power. Naaman had two personas. Naaman had a prideful insecurity. Naaman was then filled with praise. And that's Naaman's story. He was born into leprosy. He was filled with pride because of his success. And then he was filled with praise by the grace and the work of the Lord. But now that we've read that story, let's ask the next question. What does Naaman's story teach us about our God? Well, number one, really practically, it teaches us that he's always teaching. It teaches me personally that he's always teaching. Personally, I vibe so much. I connect so much with Naaman's statement of, I thought the prophet would come out and call upon God and do some snappy finger things, wave his hands, and just make me healed right away. That's what I ask of God all the time, isn't it? It's the human condition for all of us to want God to snap his fingers and change what's going on in our life, right? Am I the only one? It's the human condition. God, change this right now. There's nothing good in this for me. Think about it. It certainly would have been easier if Elisha would have just come out, called upon the power of God. It would have happened right away. They could have went back to Syria. It certainly would have been cleaner. He wouldn't have had to step into that gross, muddy Jordan River. He wouldn't have had to reveal himself to his men. It would have saved Naaman's stress and fear of revealing who he really was. But without the process, Naaman wouldn't have been able to grow out of his pride. You see, without the process, Naaman would have never been able to learn that it's okay to actually reveal the secret in his life. That he can trust the Lord more than he can fear the results of letting this secret be known. Without the process, Naaman wouldn't have been able to trust God with all of those things. To build a relationship with God where he knew God was in his corner. You see, God was so for Naaman that not only did he want him to flourish physically, but he also wanted him to flourish into a healthy person spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. God wanted to do more than just heal the practical physical thing that Naaman needed. He wanted to heal his soul. He wanted to heal his mind. He wanted to heal his spirit. He's always teaching. But secondly, and I'm so thankful for this, he's for our practical needs. God may have, wanted Naaman to change mentally, spiritually, emotionally, but you know what? God still healed Naaman of that physical, practical thing that was damaging his livelihood. It would have been so churchy for God to tell Naaman after he dipped in the water 7 times, it would have been so like us to say, Naaman, thank you so much for humbling yourself to me. You really needed to learn humility. You really needed to learn trust in somebody bigger than you. You really needed to kind of slow your roll a little bit. So don't worry, I'm not going to heal you of leprosy because you got the healing you really needed, which was in your mind and in your spirit, right? It would have been so like the church for that to happen. But thankfully it didn't, right? Thankfully, God had much to teach Naaman through the process, but he still met and cared about the practical needs of Naaman. One of my favorite examples of this is also in 2 Kings, but it's in the next chapter, 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 1 through 7. And I just want to read this as an example of God caring for our practical needs. 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Now the sons of the prophet said to Elisha, see, the place where we dwell under your charge is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan, and each one of us get there a log, and let us make a place for us to dwell. And he answered, go for it. Then one of them said, be pleased and go with your servants. And he answered, okay, I'll go. Verse 4, so he went with them, and when they came to the Jordan, they cut down trees, but as one was felling a log, his axe head fell into the water, and he cried out, alas, my master, this axe head was borrowed. Then the man of God said, where did it fall? When he showed him the place, he cut off a stick and threw it in there, and it made the iron float. And he said, take it up. So he reached out his hand and took it. How many times do you lose your phone, and it's in your butt pocket the whole time you're around looking for it? Or you're on the phone and you can't find your phone, right? For me, the common story is I give Adeline my phone to watch a show, and then I immediately go looking for my phone all throughout the house, That right there is God's practical provision. Somebody's out cutting some trees and they lose an axe head, and this guy is worried, concerned, scared because he borrowed it and he didn't want to have to work to repay it. He said, God, help me find this axe head, and it floated to the top of the river and a practical need was met. That's powerful. God is always teaching and fighting for our flourishing mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, but he never overlooks the practical, real needs in our lives. In other words, he sees what you need. He sees where you're at right now, and you're not alone in those things. So stepping right into our Matsu challenge this morning, really, really practical. One of the most insignificant characters in this whole story, number one, let's be for one another like that little girl was for Naaman. I mean, it was not her place to speak out in that situation. She was brand new. She was abducted from her homeland. She was in this family that she knew nothing about. And all of a sudden, she showed an agendaless forness in a way that I think we can apply really practically. You think about this man is the one probably who commanded the armies that stole her from her hometown. This man is the one probably that took her into this enemy city, right? And all of a sudden she says, man, I really wish this guy would go see this doctor, this prophet that I know, because he would make him so much better. Let me ask, do you bring more people problems, or do you bring more people solutions? I pray that we're a church that fights to bring people solutions. Whether we're on the same team, whether we like them, whether we just had a great conversation, whether they voted for Biden and I voted for Trump or vice versa, we don't care about those things. We're going to bring people solutions, and we're going to fight for the success of the people who are around us. Let's be for one another like that little girl was agendalessly for the flourishing of Naaman. Secondly, reveal the secret and trust the process. Reveal the secret and trust the process. None of these things would have happened if Naaman would have actually just rode back to Syria. None of these things would have happened if Naaman wouldn't have had the courage, the bravery, the boldness to remove his armor and reveal himself to his men and step down into the river. Trust the process and reveal the secret. God, I promise you, isn't going to make fun of what you reveal. God, I promise you, isn't going to chastise you for what you reveal. God isn't going to cast shame or embarrassment upon you for what you reveal. He is only going to encourage, and he'll only prove to be for you and in your corner. Let me pray. Jesus, thank you so much for always teaching. In every moment of every situation, Lord, we can trust that you are leading us to something good. Lord, even when we're begging you, we're on our knees or on our face, crying out, saying, remove this situation from me right now. There are story after story after story in your word, in your narrative, Jesus, of you teaching at all times, that you work all things for good for those who place their faith in you. God, help us trust that process today. That we acknowledge that is much easier said than done. And there are no answers really as to how to do that. But Lord, would your Spirit empower us today in our lives in a divine way? Give us that peace that passes understanding so that we can trust you and know that you are good. God, I pray as we step into this next song, Lord, if someone in here is broken, if someone in here is hurting, God, I pray that you just show them how much you're for them. God, would your Spirit speak in a divine, intimate way to people in this room who need you here and now? And would we know, Lord, without a shadow of a doubt, that you are in our corner, that you long to see us flourish, and Lord, that you're going to raise that axe head from the bottom of the river to the top in our own lives. Jesus, thank you, and we love you.